Netflix's The Empress tells the story of Sisi, the famous and tragic beauty. But how much of what we saw on screen was true? And how much was just dramatic fiction? In this video, I'm breaking it all down. Welcome back to Female Tales. I'm Yulia, and together on this channel, we explore the stories of remarkable women from history. If history speaks to you, like the video, join our community, and let's head straight into the depths of the past. Let's start with the fact that the Empress series claims to be based on the book The Reluctant Empress by Brigitte Hamann. This biography of Empress Elisabeth, written back in the 1980s, is considered one of the most well-researched and widely read. I took this seriously. I actually bought the book and read all 600 pages. And I have to say, judging by what ended up on screen, I think the showrunners and I must have read completely different books. Because almost everything we see in the series has been twisted, distorted, or dramatized so heavily that it barely resembles Sisi's real life. People often comment, but it's not a documentary, so you can't expect historical accuracy. But I have a counter-argument. If that's the case, why not just create a completely fictional character? Why take a real historical figure and rewrite her story however you like? The answer is painfully simple. Because the name Sisi is famous, and it sells. It draws viewers in immediately. If you've ever been to Vienna, you'll know everything there is Sisi branded. Chocolates, pastries, souvenirs. She's a historical figure who still generates real profit. I'll be honest, I'm not a huge fan of Elisabeth as a historical figure, but I fully admit that her life was dramatic enough on its own. It really didn't need any made-up plot twists. So, let's go through the main inventions of the series one by one and dig a little deeper into her actual biography. First, let's talk about her name. In the very first episode, Sisi immediately tells her mother not to call her that, insisting that her name is Elisabeth.
Sisi, hörst du mir zu? Nenn mich Elisabeth.
All the children in her family had shortened, affectionate versions of their names. For example, her sister Helena was called Nene, and Elisabeth herself signed her private letters as Sisi with one S in the middle and used that spelling throughout her life. So no, she clearly wasn't against her nickname. The show jumped straight into fiction from the very first scenes, with a strangely dressed suitor arriving for Sisi and her deliberately sabotaging the engagement. Her mother is furious. This is already the fourth suitor Sisi has turned down, all because she's this so-called feminist who doesn't want to get married and just wants to live on her own. In reality, none of this ever happened. Yes, her mother was indeed already searching for a good marriage match for her, and Sisi was even taken to Dresden for a potential introduction, but no proposal came out of it. And here's something many people don't expect. Her mother was actually quite worried about her daughter's prospects, because within the family, Sisi was considered the plain one. Yes, just think about that for a second. A woman around whose beauty an entire cult has been built over the centuries was originally overshadowed by her older sister Helene, who, ironically, is now often remembered as the less attractive one. Their mother once wrote about 15-year-old Sisi. She's pretty because she is very young and animated, but she has no single pretty feature. In the series, Sisi and Franz first meet in a forest, in a sort of fairy tale moment, which then quickly turns into an intense romantic connection. But in reality, they had already met once before, back in 1848, when Sisi was just 11 years old. Neither she nor her sister made any impression on him at the time. And just in case you haven't seen my previous video, yes, they were cousins, their mothers were sisters, which is exactly why their paths crossed in the first place. Their second, more fateful meeting happened not in the woods, but over tea in the salon of her future mother-in-law, Archduchess Sophie. To be fair, the show did get one detail right. Both sisters were dressed in black not as a fashion choice, but because their luggage had been lost on the way, and they was in mourning after a relative's death. But from there, the series starts to feel like The Bachelor set in the 1800s. They lie on the floor, secretly kiss at night, and the next day, Franz gazes at the two sisters as if deciding who gets his final rose. Helene, devastated, runs off in tears, while Elisabeth wins his heart. In real life, it was nowhere near that romantic or dramatic. Elisabeth was so inexperienced, She didn't even realise the emperor had fallen for her. Her future mother-in-law later wrote in her letter, "The dear little one did not suspect the deep impression she had made on Francie." At that time, Elisabeth was still mourning her first forbidden love, Count Richard, and was writing melancholy poems about him. She felt deeply embarrassed when her mother hinted at the emperor's interest. The following evening at the ball, they danced 2 cotillions, and Franz gave her flowers. Elisabeth later said that she didn't understand the meaning behind it. She simply had no idea what was coming. The very next day, through his mother Sophie, Franz proposed marriage, much to Sisi's complete shock. Elisabeth's mother, Ludwig, famously responded, "One does not send the Emperor of Austria packing." Of course, Sisi later said, "I love the Emperor so much. If only he were not the Emperor." But let's be honest, she was a 15-year-old girl, suddenly thrust into a situation where she didn't really have a choice but to fall in love. Imagine, you're the plain younger sister, 15 years old, and one of the most powerful men in the world asks for your hand, and your mother tells you there's no saying no. Would Elisabeth have agreed to the marriage if she had been, say, 25 instead of 15? We'll never know. But years later, she said this about it. "Marriage is an absurd arrangement. One is sold as a 15-year-old child and makes a vow one does not understand and then regrets for 30 years or more, and which one can never undo again." In the show, Sisi arrives in Vienna fairly quickly after the engagement. But in reality, more than 6 months passed. During that time, she was intensely prepared for her new role, and she and Franz met several more times, including on her birthday at Christmas. The series also invents a rather strange storyline between Elisabeth and Franz's brother, Maximilian. He's constantly urging her to run away, telling her Franz isn't the right man for her, and acting as if he's secretly in love with her. But in reality, there were absolutely no romantic undertones between Elisabeth and Maximilian. He wasn't even present during the engagement. We know this because Archduchess Sophie wrote him detailed letters describing how things were unfolding. If there was anyone Sisi might have had a potential romantic connection with, it was actually Archduke Karl Ludwig, Franz's other younger brother. I didn't notice him in the series at all, unless I somehow missed him. Let me know in the comments if he was there. Karl Ludwig and Sisi had exchanged letters and gifts since childhood, and her mother had actually hoped that Sisi would marry him. The show turns Maximilian into some sort of scheming villain, apparently plotting to overthrow his brother. By the end of season 1, he even gets dramatically arrested on Franz's orders, all thanks to the director's flair for melodrama, of course. Yes, the brothers did have different political views at various points in their lives, but they were also quite close. Maximilian was not the reckless playboy or rude manipulator we see on screen. He built a career in the Navy and later even became the Emperor of Mexico. Oh, and let me show you this one moment between Maximilian and Sisi that made me laugh out loud like a seagull.
Gefällt sie Ihnen? Eure Mutter gab sie mir.
Sie gehörte meiner Großtante Marie Antonia.
Marie Antoinette.
Sie trug sie noch, als sie ihren Kopf unter der Guillotine verlor.
Apparently, Marie Antoinette was wearing this exact piece of jewellery when she was guillotined. I wonder if they've ever actually read any historical descriptions of her execution. But now, plot twist, Netflix is actually getting some compliments from me. One of the subplots in the series focuses on Franz's youngest brother, Archduke Ludwig Victor. At first, when the show started presenting him as a transgender character, I definitely rolled my eyes a little. I assumed they were just forcing in a modern agenda. But then I looked into it, and it turns out Ludwig Victor was openly homosexual and did, in fact, wear women's clothing. He refused every marriage proposal that was ever arranged for him, and eventually lived far away from court, because, unsurprisingly, his orientation repeatedly got him into scandals. For example, there was one incident in a public bathhouse where he apparently placed his hand on another man's knee and got slapped in the face. After that, it was Franz himself who suggested he quietly leave Vienna. He dedicated his life to patronage, the arts and philanthropy, far away from the Austrian court. And this is exactly the kind of storyline I want to see, when it's based on an actual historical figure with a complicated and very real life shaped by rejection and prejudice. Not some random, made-up subplot inserted just for effect. Also, credit where credit is due, the casting here was excellent. The actor really does look strikingly similar to the real Ludwig Victor. So yes, Netflix, big thumbs up from me on this one. Before we get back to dissecting the historical details, I'd like to take a moment to talk about the costumes. Normally, I don't criticize them too harshly, because I understand that they're often modernized for the sake of aesthetics or visual appeal. But in this series, there were moments when things got seriously extravagant, especially when it came to the jewelry. Some of it honestly looked like it was ordered from a cheap online shop. I also came across quite a bit of criticism surrounding the main outfit of Season 1, Sisi's wedding dress and that very strange headpiece. Because in reality, her bridal look was completely different. She wore a white dress of moire fabric, along with a heavy white coat embroidered in gold, and a diamond diadem complemented by a bridal wreath, made of fresh myrtles and orange blossoms. It was probably inspired by a trend set earlier by Queen Victoria. But to be honest, I personally didn't like the dress in the series. It often looked stiff and awkward from certain angles. What do you think of the costumes and hairstyles? Are you more in favour of historical accuracy, or do you enjoy a modern reinterpretation? The entire plot of Season 1 revolves around how unprepared Sisi supposedly is for her role as Empress, and how she keeps embarrassing her husband in one scandalous situation after another, all, of course, invented by the screenwriters. I'm not going to break down every single dramatic exaggeration here, but I do want to say this. Elisabeth did genuinely struggle to adapt to the rigid etiquette of the Austrian court. She was under immense pressure from the system itself and from her powerful mother-in-law. She truly didn't understand why shoes were only supposed to be worn once, why she suddenly couldn't speak freely or act the way she wanted. And it's important to remember, she grew up in the freedom of Possenhofen Castle, running barefoot through the Bavarian countryside. And now, in Vienna, she was writing poetry filled with homesickness and quiet despair. And freedom. You turned from me. I have awakened from a rapture which held my spirit captive, and vainly do I curse this exchange in which I gambled away you. Freedom. Away. The series shows young Elisabeth being brutally laced into a corset, and even asking to go outside because she can't breathe, suggesting that this was a cruel ritual imposed on her by the court. But in truth, this had far more to do with Elisabeth's own personal obsession. For the rest of her life, she was fixated on maintaining an extremely thin figure, about 50 kilograms, at a height of 175 centimeters, with a famously tiny waist. Her dresses took up to 3 hours to lace, and sometimes were literally sewn onto her. She subjected herself to strict diets and intense daily exercise routines. Most likely, she suffered from some form of eating disorder. Later in life, doctors noted that she showed signs of starvation-related swelling at just 43 kilograms. That's how far she was willing to go in order to hold on to her beauty. Even her mother-in-law was alarmed, writing letters about how she was wasting away. So, no, she wasn't being forced into tight corsets. That's another bit of Netflix fiction. A small detail maybe, but the devil's in the details. Season 1 also centers heavily around Sisi's pregnancy storyline. The pressure is constant. She's told over and over again that she must produce an heir. They even show her being forced to drink raw eggs, and at one point her mother-in-law tells her the marriage will be annulled if she doesn't get pregnant. Elisabeth agrees to leave, but in a dramatic twist she's secretly already expecting and runs away from the palace. In reality though, she became pregnant very quickly. She and Franz married on April 24th, 1854, and their first child, a daughter, was born on March the 5th, 1855. That's just 10 months later. So, in a sense, they succeeded on the very first try. Interestingly, it was actually Archduchess Sophie who had experienced real difficulties with pregnancy. Before finally giving birth to her long-awaited son, she suffered numerous miscarriages. As for the birth of Sisi and Franz's second child, Gisela, the series turns it into a near-death experience. Elisabeth is shown barely surviving, then declaring she never wants more children. and the doctors warn her that having more children could put her life at risk. But in reality, her second delivery was quick and relatively easy. The real physical and emotional difficulties came after the birth of their only son and heir, Crown Prince Rudolf. That's when Elisabeth struggled the most and even had to leave to recover in the Mediterranean. At some point, she may have developed a complete aversion to physical intimacy. In one of her poems, she wrote, "For me, no love. For me, no wine. The one makes you ache, the other makes you ill." And yet, she was still expected to have another child, a so-called spare heir. Instead, she gave birth to another daughter, Maria Valerie. And that was the couple's last child. Elisabeth had a complicated relationship with motherhood. There was a certain emotional distance between her and her children, largely because she was constantly competing with her mother-in-law Sophie for control over them. And with the two eldest, Sophie won. That's exactly why the show made her the main antagonist. She's portrayed in the series as a woman who openly dislikes Elisabeth and is determined to break her spirit. She even cynically arranges a mistress for her son and starts looking for a new potential bride the moment Elisabeth falls into depression after the death of their first child. Just recently, I released a separate video all about Sophie, a deep dive into the relationship between mother-in-law and daughter-in-law. If you haven't seen it yet, what are you waiting for? So, I won't retell everything here, but I will say this. Yes, Sophie was undeniably strict, authoritative, and powerful. But she was also capable of empathy toward Elisabeth. Sisi herself later said that the Archduchess surely meant so well in everything, but that the paths were arduous and the manner harsh. So, in that sense, the show really did vilify her more than necessary, but I suppose every drama needs its villain. By the way, here's another moment that had me screeching like a seagull again. It's the scene where Elisabeth supposedly gets a tattoo of a star on her shoulder as a tribute to her deceased daughter. Very touching, very symbolic, but completely fictional. In reality, Elisabeth did get a tattoo, but it was an anchor, not a star. She had it done because she loved the sea, and apparently her husband was absolutely shocked by the whole performance. But of course, the show needed something more sentimental. So fine, we'll let that one slide. Of course, the show couldn't resist adding some completely fictional characters. One example is Countess Leontine Apafi, supposedly a revolutionary who murders the real Countess Apafi and takes her place in order to infiltrate Elisabeth's inner circle. But this character is entirely made up, and it's not even clear why she was included in the first place. Most likely, it was just to add another subplot. So overall, I'd say The Empress is an entertaining show, and if it got you at least a little more interested in the real history of Sisi, that's already a win. But as always, don't believe everything you see on screen, and even better go back to the old trustworthy friends, books. Meanwhile, the show has been renewed for a third and final season, and judging by the cast's Instagram updates, filming is already underway. Are you planning to watch the finale? And what do you think of this reimagining of Sisi's story? Let me know in the comments and I'll see you in the next video.